Hey everyone, Liz Miller here with ReachKCK Youth Ministry here in Kansas City, Kansas. I'm hanging out in the Youth Hub, and I want to share with you a couple of ways that we can actually put into practice using play and using games in our ministry, and really making it a formative experience, and not just a talking message. We really want to be kinesthetic. We really want to experience the message, and so we can use play. We can use games with that. It's kind of built into our system, and we're going to talk about 3 ways to do that today. The first way is just changing up a game. The second way is to use an analogy, and the third way, and this is probably the most important way, is in your decompression or your debrief. So let's get started. All right, so here I am hanging out in like the game space. This is our coffee shop area, and it's kind of just a cool place to hang out. But we have kind of a game shelf here. We got Monopoly, Quelf, Life, Sorry, Battleship, Apples to Apples, Personal Favorite. And we're going to talk about our first way here that we can use playing within our ministry. So one simple way is to just think of these games that we already know. You've got games lying around your house, I'm sure of it. Think of these games and then think of a way that you might be able to actually change that game in order to convey a message. Here's what I mean. So I've got a deck of Uno cards right here, right? Typical Uno cards, and I mean, they're regular Uno cards. Well, all you got to do is, change them up a little bit. So on the other side of these Uno cards, I printed out some Bible verses about community. And what I did is then I had the kids pull one, play with them. And every time they got a card that had a Bible verse on it, they had to read it out loud, and we started talking about community. Just a simple way. They already knew how to play Uno. No big deal there. And then we took some time and we wrote on a poster board what we learned about community, and we signed our names to it because we wanted to form stronger community here. This happened during our sports ministry. Another opportunity, for example, again with this Uno game, you can do a lot with Uno, is I actually one time pulled out all of the wild cards from one deck of Uno, and the kids didn't know it. So I handed them a bunch of Uno cards, and the teens started playing Uno. And what happened is they're playing a regular game, and after, about 10 minutes, I kind of stopped the game. I'm like, hey, what's going on? Did you notice anything different? And they're like, no, not really. And then I told them that I had taken out all the wild cards, and they all were furious with me and called me a cheater for taking them out. But then we began to realize that without the wild cards, the game was just not the same. And so we actually got to talk about how important every single part of the Christian marriage vows are, to give yourself to each other freely, totally, fruitfully, and faithfully. You need all 4 of those vows, just like you need the wild cards in your game of Uno to actually make a difference and to play the game right. You need all 4 of the vows, and you need to really uphold all 4 of the vows in order for your marriage to be strong. So, I mean, by taking out or by changing a piece of a game, you can actually make an incredible point, and you can convey a message that you don't even, as the minister, need to necessarily convey so overtly. The teens, the youth, they just kind of get it through a little bit of decompression or debriefing. And we're going to talk about that in a second. So feel free to think about some of these other games that you might be able to use. Maybe you can borrow some from us here. Maybe you can use some from the Center for Games, the library over at Mid-American Nazarene University. Maybe you've got some in your home, or you can pick some up at a garage sale that might be able to inspire you to just change it up a little bit and convey whatever message you're looking to convey that day. All right, so I want to talk just a moment now about analogy, right? So, analogy is something that I think we've all used in our ministry at one point or another, whether we realize it or not. I mean, analogy is when we use one thing to represent another thing, right? So, we've seen maybe the analogy of stirring chocolate into milk to represent the Holy Spirit being stirred into our lives in confirmation. Another great confirmation analogy is using fire. I've got a candle here because I really like fire. And fire is representative of the Holy Spirit oftentimes. And that can be a great analogy to use with young people. They like fire. To kind of indicate that, I've actually written a prayer to the Holy Spirit. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, that prayer on this candle. And that can kind of help bring an analogy alive. You can draw an analogy from, just about anything. Truthfully, you can draw an analogy from a leaf outside as, on a fall day. You can draw an analogy from your hairbrush. You can, pick up anything that you have laying around your house and you can draw an analogy from it. You have to be careful with those analogies, though. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in our decompression or debriefing segment here in just a moment. But analogy is another way that we can use play and interactive experience in our ministries. Okay, so it's all been building up to this decompression. What is it? How do we do it? I would say that decompression is probably the key to any kind of interactive, any kind of experiential youth ministry. And here's why. Our lives are so compressed. There's so much information. There's so many experiences. There's so many feelings that we're all feeling every single day. Our calendars alone are just chock full of every single minute detail. And our youth, the teenagers, the young people that we deal with, same thing. And they've got their phones, they have Facebook, they have Twitter, they have Instagram, they have a million social media accounts, they have homework, they have jobs. They've got so many different things that they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. They just can't even comprehend it all. Their brain is literally compressed. And so when we add one more experience to that compression, they just can't make sense of it unless we actually are intentional about digging out a message from it and making it an intentional experience. So that's why I prefer the term decompression over debriefing, although the two are very similar. So let's talk about how to do this. I'm going to throw up this slide here that was used in our training the other week. Decompression is a series of questions that we can ask our young people about a certain experience. And this experience can be about anything. I'll give you some examples here in a moment. But you can ask them about feelings. How did you feel about a certain situation? What did you like about it? What did you dislike about it? What happened? That's my favorite question to ask. What happened here? What did you just experience? Tell me about it, And of course, if they say, well, you were there, say, hey, tell me in your own words, what happened when you were participating in this event or this activity. One of my favorite decompression questions that Matt has here on this slide is simply, how would you change the game? If you were in charge of it, how would you change up this experience? And that can be really, really enlightening to a play decompression. Now, here's the scary thing about a decompression. You never know where it's going to go. You can have an idea of where you want to lead the young people to in a decompression, but they might not go there. They might want to go down an entirely different path, which is still okay, so long as it's intentional. So if you were expecting everyone to have a phenomenal, exciting, exhilarating experience in a particular playful atmosphere, and one person speaks up and said, you know what, this was not fun. Like, I did not have a good time. That does not mean that your experience totally failed. That just means follow the decompression where it's leading. And maybe this person will be willing to explain why they did not have a great experience, and you can go deeper into it. Here's what I mean. This video that I'm throwing up right now is from a game that we played, really silly. Hey, see how many balls you can pile into your arms and carry at one time. And it was kind of a relay race style. People were dropping balls all over the place. And at the end of it, a lot of the teams were like, you know what? That wasn't really fun. I couldn't win. I couldn't hold enough, But what we started asking is what happened. And they said, well, I kept dropping balls. Okay, well, let's talk about this. As we decompress this, they began to realize that so often in our lives, we carry too much. We try to hold on to too many things in our lives. We just talked about how our brains get compressed by so much going on. And we began to realize through playing this game and then through decompression that truthfully, God can hold some of the balls. God can juggle some of the chaos in our lives, all of the chaos in our lives. And we have family and friends in our community that can also help us too. Kind of a cool thing. Another example is archery. Let me throw up this video of archery. And when we're playing archery, you're just shooting an arrow at a target, right? And it doesn't really mean a whole lot until you decompress it and you start talking about, hey, what are you aiming for in life? What are your goals? And then you start talking about real life things like, I just want to get an A on my test is what one teen might say. Or, I really just want to get along with my sister, is what somebody else might say. And so then you start talking about goals, and then maybe you start working your way from physical, concrete goals that you can see, like getting an A on a test or getting into college. You start working into where does God factor in our goals? What are our faith goals? Do we have a goal to be in right relationship with God? And you kind of build momentum as you go through the decompression to reach an intentional point of realizing that, hey, archery is not just archery. Archery is about my relationship with God. Okay, here's another example. At our training the other day, we played a game called Bombs and Shields, and you pick a person in the room, and that person is your bomb. And then you pick another person in the room, and that person is your shield. And you have bombs and shields, and you have 30 seconds, and you have to keep your shield in between the bomb, you and the bomb, otherwise you blow up. And so you can decompress this pretty easily. I mean, you talk about who is your shield, and you can tie that into, what are the things that protect us in our lives? What are some defense mechanisms that we use, and are they all good? What might be a good shield is the armor of God. Maybe we can put the armor of God around us as a shield from the bombs that the devil tries to throw into our lives on a daily basis. You can take an otherwise silly game or an icebreaker that doesn't make any sense, or even fishing or archery, like we said before, and you can make it such an intentional, exciting experience that suddenly people, not just youth, connect with God and their relationship with God. Now, a couple of things to be careful about with decompression is to not just jump straight to God, because truthfully, that'll be the tendency. You kind of want to get them to a point where they realize that there is something deeper here, but you want to connect it to their real life as well. I mean, that game about bombs and shields, we can start talking about defense mechanisms that we put up in our own lives with a shield. Maybe I am just laughing all the time in the class clown, and that's very real, and that's maybe my defense mechanism. But, maybe I talk about that first and talk about some ways to connect it to my real life before I start talking about the armor of God, before I start asking kids about what the armor of God is, because they don't realize that. But maybe then the next time that they're goofing off in class, they realize, oh, hey, maybe I don't have to goof off in class. Maybe I can ask God to be my protection. I can ask God to be my shield. And there's that connection that's kind of happening organically or naturally. So with decompression, be careful to not just jump straight to God. You want to have your experience connected to real life, family, friends, community, something going on in current events. And then from there, dig in deeper a little bit into our faith life. Does that make sense? Another thing that you want to be careful about with decompression is, just being open to going where the youth lead. Like I kind of mentioned before, it might not always go the way that you have planned. I had a game once where we were playing with puzzles, and I had a whole idea lined out about, where we were going to go with this. I gave some people a puzzle box to the picture that their puzzle was based off of, and some I did not. And I had this whole idea about how it was going to go. And the decompression, honest to God, went the complete opposite direction. But you know what? It was okay. And in that moment, the teenagers taught me something. And they taught me how to be flexible. They taught me how to fly by the seat of my pants. And it was okay. And actually, they learned more from that experience. We all learned more from that decompression experience than if I would have tried to plan something out anyway. So decompression is a huge ministry tool that you can use for any experience that you have. Truthfully, you can use decompression when you are simply transitioning from one activity to the next. So I highly encourage you to use decompression all the time in every single event that you have, so that the youth that you're working with realize that there is something deeper going on, and that they kind of naturally begin to understand that through experiences that they have in their own life.
Because you can have fun at the same time and interact with the person that you're playing with, even if you get mad at them because you won, but you still had a fun time.
Games. Okay, games are great because they really take the edge off. And I think they're great because they can also show natural tendencies. Are they risk takers, or what is their personality like? So you really learn a lot by just observing the youth as they play, as they interact. What do they talk? How do they talk? And you learn about their language and stuff. And so you get to connect on this level that's not so direct and intense, and it lets off the pressure. And you really get to see the person and the personality come out. And that's an awesome start to any relationship, I think.
All right, I want to offer a couple more closing tips and tricks when it comes to playing and using interactive games in your ministry. I know a lot of you are working with young people in religious education. Whether you are or you aren't, these are great examples that you are welcome to use. One of the things that we can do when we're teaching about the Holy Spirit, for example, we've got the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Think about a gift. Go find some gift bags from home. Just use materials that you've got lying around your house and bring them in. Fill them up with a little bit of candy and put them around the room. And inside each bag is not only candy, but you can put a description of one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And that is something that your young people will not forget because you tied candy to it and kind of made a scavenger hunt around the room as they discovered the gifts of the Spirit. You can do the same thing with the fruits of the Spirit. Go find some different fruits, bring it in. And each fruit that you physically bring in, could maybe represent a fruit of the Spirit. Really cool experience that they won't forget. At the very least, they'll remember that the fruits of the Spirit are yummy. In any case, another thing, if you're teaching about saints, saints are really, really awesome, and there's a lot of amazing pictures of them that you can just literally Google. Use the internet to your advantage. We've talked a lot about icebreakers. Go and Google them. There's a ton of them online, and you can kind of draw analogies and come up with your own decompressions based on whatever you find on Google. But back to the saints. As far as the saints go, maybe you could pull up a picture of them, or to bring the saints really home and how we're all called to be saints. If you're willing to be a little bit vulnerable, bring in some pictures of some of your own loved ones that have passed away, that have walked with God in their life, that we believe to be part of the communion of saints. And, bring in pictures of them and say, hey, who in your life is a saint? And how can we be made saints? Suddenly it becomes very real. However we can make our faith real is so important. Truthfully, the best field trip that I ever took as a student was when I studied abroad in Europe. And I went to all of these places like Versailles and Berlin, where I always read about in my history books, but truthfully, when I saw it, it all came alive. And so whenever we can make an experience of our faith come alive, when we see it, when we can experience adoration with music, with prayer, with reflection, when we can light a candle in a prayer experience. That's when our faith comes alive. And that's when the faith of our children, when the faith of our teens will come alive as well. So I highly encourage you to do that. Pick my brain. Feel free if you have any questions about what to do with a particular experience. Bounce them off of your pastor, your team members. We're here to back each other up. Just in closing, too, playing is often seen as kind of something that you do that leads up to your message. But one thing that I want to make sure that we are getting at the core of our hearts is that we can use play as the message. We can use play as the formation. Remember that game of Uno that I described in the beginning of this video? How we can use games to actually convey the message. And we can absolutely use decompression to convey any message or to help our young people understand any message. Truthfully, playing prepares us to go deeper. And it prepares us to meet God in an encounter. It helps us get there. It helps us prepare our hearts to be open to God when we're open with each other. Playing helps us get on the same level, literally the same playing field. And when we're all on the same playing field, we're willing to be a little bit more vulnerable. And when we're willing to be a little bit more vulnerable together, we form community. And it is in community that Christ wants to meet us, especially in your youth ministries, especially in your religious education. So know that I am praying for you, and I hope that this video has been a little bit of service to you. Feel free to reach out to me at any point in the future. Thank you so much.